Okay, welcome. It looks like we have a good group with us, and hopefully we'll have some more people joining us soon. But let's get started. We have a lot of important content to talk about tonight. So the topic of this evening's webinar is helping your young adult build independence during a pandemic. Thank you so much for joining us. This is part of the New York Presbyterian Hospital Youth Anxiety Center webinar series. My name is Dr. Shannon Bennett. I'm a clinical psychologist at Weill Cornell in Manhattan, where I am the site clinical director for the Youth Anxiety Center at Weill Cornell.
And I'm Dr. Anthony Poliafico, and I'm also a clinical psychologist at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, and I direct Columbia's Clinic for Anxiety and Related Disorders Westchester Clinic in Tarrytown, New York.
So we appreciate so much the questions that you sent us. It's really helpful for us to get a sense of what are the things that you all are thinking about and the questions that you have and what you want to know and learn about. So here's some of the things that we heard from you in advance of tonight's webinar. One person asked, how do I motivate my child to engage more with their schoolwork? This is a question we're hearing a lot right now. Another question was, how do I motivate him to learn new skills to prepare for when the pandemic is over, even if they don't think they need it? That's a really important question as well. How do I encourage my child's independence while at the same time meeting her needs during this time? And also, what things should parents be doing to foster independence in college? And I think the same can be asked for, in preparation for the transition to college and in the preparation to transition out of college. These are all really important questions that we're going to be talking about throughout the next 45 minutes. And then we'll come back to more questions from all of you at the end. So if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function. Don't use the hand raise function because we can't see that, but we have a lot of questions that you all submitted ahead of time, so we'll come back to those at the end of our webinar. And the things we plan to talk about this evening is really reviewing for you the milestones for developing independence in early adulthood, during quote unquote normal times. What are the things that we as psychologists are always working with our teens and our young adults to help them and their parents navigate these milestones of developing independence? And then what are the changes in independence and autonomy that are related to COVID-19 and the influence of anxiety and depression? And then finally, what are the strategies that are helpful to help people cope and to cultivate independence that we can use right now? And also what can we do after life returns again to quote unquote normal, or what we understand will be a new normal? So what's going on right now? We know life has shifted drastically for all families everywhere. Things have changed across all of the different aspects of our life. Our teens and young adults have lost many opportunities to have fun, to gain skills that they need, to be independent. This is very disappointing for youth, and it's really worrisome for their parents. At the same time, all of our emotions are very high. And there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty about the world and about how do we cope? How do we best cope with everything that's going on? And so we're curious and we're nervous about how do we help our youth to thrive without school or work or social experiences or other touch points outside of the home. And due to COVID-19, there's been a drastic reduction in the amount of independence I think that we all feel. Right? There's a reduced structure without school, without work. There's a lot more downtime to manage. Parents are at home more. We're all at home together, trying to manage all in the same time and space, the things that need to get done. But at the same time, there are some opportunities to build new independent living skills, and we'll talk a little bit more about these. So when we think about young adult development, there's a lot of really important tasks that happen during this phase of life, this transition from adolescence into young adulthood. This is a list of our typical developmental milestones. And you can see almost every single one is being impacted in some way by the circumstances that are going on right now. So if we look at the list, emotional independence young adults in this phase of life are trying to understand how they manage their emotions on their own. They have tasks they need to complete, their educational requirements. They have to figure out what are both their short-term and their long-term goals for work and career. They're trying to cultivate long-term relationships, friendships, and romantic relationships. They're taking a stab at living independently and working towards financial independence. They're starting to take more ownership over their own self-care and learning things about sleep habits and managing their own health care. When, what sort of exercise and diet routines are best for them, and how do they soothe themselves in times of crisis when they're outside of their, home and their safety net of the family. And then there's a lot of behavioral independence, so starting to take initiative to learn to be assertive, to reach out to professors or to friends or to your boss when you have questions or you want to initiate new tasks or complete tasks, and to start to learn how to do these things on their own. And we know these things don't happen overnight. These are the goals of the entire phase of emerging adulthood. And young people fall all along a spectrum in their development, in their achievement of these milestones. But right now, nearly all of these milestones have been impacted by everything that's changed with COVID-19. So our educational requirements are impacted by remote learning, or classes being canceled, things being changed, not happening where they're supposed to be happening. There's fewer internships. People are learning that their summer internships or their job options just aren't present, the things that they were thinking or hoping or planning that they were going to be doing. In a time of social distancing, it's a little more complicated. We have to be more creative in how we're maintaining or finding relationships. And the same is true for romantic relationships. There's a lot more complicating factors to socializing, and especially dating online or using Zoom. Many young adults who even were living independently are now back at home in their parents' home. And this is a new adjustment to be made for those who have been living independently or those who weren't, but to have everyone back home under one roof is not easy. That takes a lot of adjustment. We know there's a very serious economic impact for so many families right now that is going to get in the way of financial independence and meeting those goals and needs. And there's a really important need to create new routines and schedules, and to be cultivating our own healthy habits. This one may be more important than ever right now, that young people and adults are creating new routines with the loss of all of our other outside routines that we were used to. We have to create a new normal and new schedules for ourselves and ways to maintain those healthy habits that keep us going throughout the day. And we have to be mindful of how do we help young people be independent and complete the tasks that they need to complete when there is a lack of structure that needs to be overcome. Maybe there's increased avoidance of tasks due to anxiety or depression, or just feeling like, I don't need to do this. This is pass fail now. Does it really matter? Or an over-reliance on parents. Now that they're back home under one roof, they may be reverting back to some earlier patterns in life where they're used to parents doing things that they maybe were doing independently on their own. All of these kind of new adjustments to COVID-19 may impact a young adult's independence. And my slides, oh, here we go.
All right, so I'm going to take over here for a little bit and talk a little bit about how this pandemic can really affect our young adults with anxiety and depression, and the way that anxiety and depression can then impact independence. I think it's fair to say that we're all dealing with major life disruptions and increased stress right now. We're all feeling it. And I think these stressors and these disruptions can be particularly hard for our young adults with a history of anxiety and depression. I want you all to imagine just for a moment a college student who had a history of anxiety and depression and who worked really hard to manage those symptoms and to graduate and to get themselves to college where they were kind of plugging along and doing okay, um, and then for the semester to kind of stop midpoint, to have to have their classes stop, to have to head home, to lose their social supports. For a lot of our young adults, it can feel like they're back to square one. It can feel like a lot of the hard work and effort that they put in to taking these big steps forward and meeting these developmental milestones, whether it be college in this example, or obtaining a job, or taking on more independent tasks, wasn't worth it. And that now they're forced to kind of take on brand new challenges and to tackle the anxiety or the low motivation that goes with that, without, without the same social supports that they may be used to. So this is, this pandemic has been a real challenge for our young adults dealing with anxiety and depression. Because on top of all these concerns, they're dealing with the same concerns we all are, and the same losses we all are, the same concerns about getting sick and about our family and about, what's going on in the world. We know that life stressors in general can worsen anxiety and depression symptoms. So, for our kids who have some vulnerability to feeling anxious or feeling depressed, they're all the more vulnerable right now, which is why it's so important to be thinking about how we support them. Um, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the way anxiety can specifically be getting in the way of independence. Then we'll talk about depression, because those are two biggies that we've been seeing, both in Dr. Bennett and I's clinical work and just in general. So we can move along here. When we're talking about anxiety, the hallmark symptom we see with anxiety is avoidance. When we're feeling anxious, it's a lot easier to avoid than to face that thing we're scared of. As another example, let's say, there's a young adult who got a job, maybe at a store or what have you, and now is unable to work, has lost that job, has lost employment, and is now tasked with finding some new way to structure his time, whether that's some new way to make money right now, albeit it's very limited and there are safety concerns for doing that, some way to volunteer his time or just to kind of keep himself active. If you're that young adult and you're feeling anxious to begin with, think about all the questions that may come up. Where do I even start? What do I say to try to, to find a new way to structure my time? Even if there are employment opportunities, why would they want me? How do I even do this? Where do I start? As the anxiety kind of picks up and moves forward, it becomes all the more easy to avoid. And as Dr. Bennett was saying, there are many new challenges that we're all facing right now that are requiring all of us to do things differently. And that can be a lot harder when we're feeling anxious. So, particularly for our young adults dealing with anxiety, participating in online calls or in online meetings or classes is a new challenge that they may not have experience with, and that can be particularly difficult. A young adult may have kind of navigated, all right, how do I participate in my live classes, but an online class with a camera on you and with kind of different new ways to talk to the world can be a challenge where avoiding can be easier. I know even right now, in terms of a talk like this, it involves us using brand new skills and thinking about how we do this, and it can provoke, our anxiety and stress a little bit. So it can be easy to avoid in those situations. Another situation we're seeing our anxious young adults struggle with is initiating correspondence with professors or employers, people who they might have seen in person a lot, and it was a lot easier to correspond. Now they might need to email that person or, God forbid, pick up a phone and make a live call to a person, or, find some other way that might be much more anxiety provoking, where again, avoidance might be an easier out. Socializing, everything's on Zoom, right? And, luckily, a lot of our young adults are used to texting and FaceTiming and finding online ways to communicate. But, that's really kind of all there is right now. And so it's been challenging for many of our young adults who get nervous or anxious about social situations and how to initiate online correspondence to do that. I'm thinking about many of our young adults who may be home from college and may not have had like an online texting or FaceTiming or Zooming relationship with kids in their dorm or friends who they had. And now to initiate that, and the questions that may come up about, is this someone who wants to hear from you? What if they don't respond? Again, it's easy to avoid these situations. There's also concerns that we see in many of our anxious kids about illness and concerns about contact with the outside world. Leaving the house can feel like a scary place for all of us. And for those of us with heightened anxiety, it can be all the scarier. So anxiety can affect our young adults' independence in all of these ways, and really kind of lead to just some regression of response of the autonomy that they had previously gained. And how might depression affect our young adults' independence? What we know about depression is that there's often a vicious cycle, that when we're feeling low and down, we withdraw. Again, it's our natural instinct to do that. We may also isolate from people. And that withdrawal and that isolation typically makes us feel worse. And so we see this cycle of feeling bad and withdrawing and feeling worse and withdrawing some more. So our young adults who are prone to depression may be kind of withdrawing even more now. So when the world is withdrawing, there may be lower motivation to reach out to friends or to find ways to structure their time or to stay, connected with their academics. We may see reduced interest in socializing, and a biggie for these young adults is sleep. I've seen, I know it's a big problem with many of our young adults, where we'll call it like a vampire sleeping schedule, where they're sleeping through most of the day and then they're up, till 4 or 5 or 6 in the morning. And it's very, very hard to kind of readjust that schedule. Depression can affect sleep. It can make it harder to fall asleep, and it can also make us more tired and sleep a lot more. So, a lot of times with our kids with depression, we're seeing this sleep schedule that can get really, really tricky and make it difficult to be out in the world when the world is up. So as we're keeping in mind the different ways that anxiety and depression can be affecting independence, we wanted to talk about what you all as parents and caregivers can do to support your kids being more independent and being more autonomous right now. And really, I think, at the forefront of that is finding that balance between understanding where our kids are at and setting expectations. It's important to know, the ways in which your young adults may be feeling anxiety and depression, and the ways that those symptoms may be making it hard for them to be out in the world, to be taking on new tasks, to maybe even be doing things around the house that you're expecting them to do. I think it's fair to say that our teens and young adults may not be as autonomous now as they were prior to this pandemic. It's easy to regress and to kind of, lose some of that independence and just kind of want to be taken care of when you come home from college or when you're kind of back in your family's home. And some of that is natural. And there just aren't as many opportunities with employment and with school and what have you for our kids to be as autonomous as they maybe were. That being said, there are opportunities to move forward. They may be limited, but they do exist, whether it's in the household or virtually or in some ways outside of the house. And so I think that while we're understanding that our kids may be dealing with anxiety and depression in a limited set of opportunities, it's also appropriate to set expectations that they meet certain responsibilities and that they contribute to family needs and family tasks at home. So it's really kind of like a tightrope walk between meeting our kids where they're at and setting expectations. But I think, by doing both, we can be appropriately and properly supporting, our young adults right now. There's an important question to be thinking about how much to support our kids right now. How much do we do for them? How much do we allow them to do on their own? And I think an important question you can ask yourself is, how much support does my kid need? We want our kids meeting those developmental milestones that Dr. Bennett mentioned earlier and becoming more independent. But as we've said, anxiety and depression can really compromise their ability or their willingness to take on these challenges. We can't expect a young adult to be making breakfast for her family if she's sleeping until 2 p.m., but we can help her to make gradual steps to get there. So it might be for a kid who's really stuck with a really poor sleep schedule, for a parent to be more involved in terms of helping them adjust their sleep schedule. But any supports like this, I would recommend be temporary and really in the service of helping our young adults take steps forward to be more independent and more autonomous. This piece is important, because it's really in line with the balance of support and expectations. I think with all the ways in which we may be helping our young adults right now, it's important to think about, how do we offer help without doing things for our young adults? This is like, an example would be, if your child needs to sign up for classes for next semester, can you sit with your young adult, and as they log in, as they look through their course offerings, as they email their advisor, versus doing any of those steps for them? Can you, support your child in calling a doctor? Maybe it's a therapist or a psychiatrist, or maybe it's a medical doctor that they need to follow up with. Can you help them set reminders? Can you help them find a supportive way to help them make that step without calling that doctor for them? And the same goes for online social opportunities, applying for work or volunteer positions that may be available. Doing the jobs for our young adults right now is certainly easier. It's much easier to accommodate, but it's not going to be helpful in the long term. And what I'm keeping in mind throughout all of this is, the more we're accommodating for our kids' anxiety and depression now, the harder it's going to be for them to adjust, when the world starts to get back to normal. So it's important to keep that in mind as we're moving forward. And on the next slide here is just an illustration of what we're talking about. This is the example that we were saying, if we have a child here at the top who avoids signing up for classes next semester, your anxiety as a parent might increase. They were supposed to sign up, the deadline's Friday. What are we going to do about this? What if they don't sign up? What if they don't get this done? And if a parent goes and signs up your child for classes, your anxiety decreases. Short-term relief, right? It's reinforcing. But what does our child learn? What she learns is that mom or dad, when push comes to shove, they're going to step in and they're going to kind of do that thing that's been hard for me, and this cycle continues. So it's important to be really resisting that urge to step in and rescue and to do things for our kids when they're anxious, or when they're, when it seems like they're too depressed to move forward. Enabling our kids is going to reinforce this unhelpful cycle. I'm keeping in mind right now that during this pandemic, it's an especially okay time for our kids to experiment with being more responsible and being more independent. The world will likely be, a bit more forgiving right now than it was prior to this pandemic, because we're all dealing with stress. We're all dealing with a lot. And so I would say, if there is a time to really kind of loosen the reins and allow our kids to kind of take steps forward, and potentially fail by doing it, but to try to do things more independently, now is a good time, as much as the world permits. Also important is that, to the extent possible, our kids should be doing the same things they were doing prior to COVID-19. If they were doing their laundry when they were away at college, they should be doing their laundry at home. Or if they were taking on tasks, if they were living at home the whole time, they should continue with those tasks. They should be purchasing needed items, even if it's a little bit harder, and if they need to kind of find online ways to do that. And, I know I mentioned this point before, but making and keeping medical appointments is really important in these times. Likely there'll be virtual appointments, but, it's important to be, in general, kind of holding our kids to those same expectations that they were meeting prior to the state of the world we're in right now. Um, and I always keep in mind, and I think it's helpful for all of us to keep in mind, um, that we can say all these things and we can say all the right things to our kids, but the best way that we can teach autonomy and independence is by modeling it ourselves. Whether it's by as ourselves, maintaining social connections and a healthy social life, scheduling Zoom calls with friends and family, or as parents or grandparents or caregivers, developing our own daily and weekly schedules and modeling for our kids how we can be organized and give ourselves structure right now, and caring for our personal needs. What we do is much more important than what we say. And so keeping in mind how you're modeling independence and autonomy during these times can be really important.
So a few other tips I'll go through, and in terms of how do we help create opportunities for our teens and young adults to continue to build their independence despite the limitations of the given moment. One strategy that we use often in therapy, and we can use this at home as well, is to help our young adults break tasks down into the smallest achievable steps. So to go with the example we've been talking about, if signing up for a semester worth of classes feels too big or too overwhelming right now, you don't even want to think about having to go back to school. What is the smallest step that you can take? Is that just going and looking, logging in to see what your password is, and then come back to it a little bit later? Is it emailing a friend to see what they've done? Whatever, however we can scaffold these tasks to just get the ball rolling a little bit and help our young adults think in this way, like, I don't have to tackle this all at once. I can break this down into small steps and help them kind of think about how do they get moving in the direction that they want to go. Another good thing that we can be thinking about is how do we set family goals? So what are things that we can all be working on? Dr. Poliafico mentioned modeling. So absolutely, we can model for our kids what we want them to be doing, but also there's ways that we may be able to work on these things all together. And then we share the successes together, and we can reward each other's successes and also work together to problem solve any barriers that we're hitting up against. So for example, we might agree, okay, we are all going to watch one less Netflix show tonight and go to bed a little bit earlier. And so that's a family goal now. It's not just something you're kind of nagging your one kid that they have to do it. And if we all do that, we all go to bed at the time that we've said is our slightly earlier bedtime, then we all get to order our favorite takeout or work together to make our favorite meal, whatever works for your family, the next day once we've accomplished that task. So it's a way of holding everybody accountable and rewarding ourselves together as a family for meeting that goal. Another example might be, okay, we're all going to get out today. We're going to get out. It's safe to do so where we are. So we're going to plan to take a family walk today. And then how do we problem solve that? So let's work together. We'll plan our route in advance. What is the route that feels most safe right now? Or what time do we think it will be less busy if that's something that we're concerned about? So we think about how do we problem solve those barriers as a group so that we can get out and meet this goal together. And then again, share in the natural reward that it feels good to be out together, or plan some other secondary reward for managing to meet this goal. And I think this has been mentioned already, but we have a lot of time together right now, so we can use this time to teach and learn new skills. So things that maybe even adults are needing to learn new things. Can we cook something none of us have ever cooked before, so our kids can see us flounder and make mistakes, or not have to follow a recipe and not quite know what we're doing? Or we can teach our kids some new cleaning skills, or if they don't know how to do their laundry or ironing, if they need to do their taxes, or they can help watch you if that's something they need to learn for the future. This is an opportunity. They don't often learn this in school. What does it look like to be financially responsible and have to think about taxes? Sewing, making masks. There's lots of different things that people are doing, and we're all getting creative and trying new things as we're looking for ways to fill this time, and also being creative with managing the responsibilities that we already have. So we're modeling, how do we plan and make decisions and fit things in? So these are ways that we can involve our teens and young adults in the responsibilities that the whole family needs to meet. In addition, all people, as humans, we prefer predictability and consistency over uncertainty. And there's so much uncertainty in the world right now. So helping each other to stay rooted in routines is particularly important right now, right? One of the things that we're repeating a lot is let's focus on the things that we can control and not, to take our minds off of all of the things that we can't control. So that may include creating a bit of a household set of rules or a household routine that if everybody's back under the roof, everybody's got to follow it. So it's okay to set clear household expectations. We're all living under the same place, and we want this to be a harmonious place to live. So it can be adjusted to the current circumstances. Maybe the rules are a little different than they used to be, but you kind of agree on what they are, and then it's really important that they're clear, so everybody knows what the household rules and expectations are, and then that we're consistent, right? So if you're not meeting the expectations, there's some sort of consistent idea of what happens if we're not all pulling our weight. So we can think about what that means for your own household, but it's okay to have a set of rules and expectations that everybody's kind of following to make life feel comfortable and harmonious for everyone at home. And I think we have to remind ourselves again and again and again. I think right now, Dr. Poliafico mentioned this, things are hard, people are stressed. We need to be kind to ourselves, to our partners, and to our kids. Everybody's doing their best to figure this out. We can practice patience even when we feel really frustrated. We can practice empathy and thinking about what may be motivating some of the frustrating behavior that we're seeing, but it doesn't mean that we have to accept it. We can still set some reasonable expectations and help to push people in the direction that we want them to go. So in terms of our sort of take-home points, to just reiterate some of the things that we've already talked about, it's important to maintain expectations for independence and autonomy, even though things are a little bit different right now, or a lot different right now. It's okay to keep some idea of where a standard for behavior is to be set and to hold that steady, while also understanding that some exceptions and flexibility may be needed right now to understand where everybody's at and what we're all capable of. We can listen with empathy to the emotional and behavioral challenges that everyone is experiencing and try to meet people where they are. We can provide support and help with problem solving without taking things over or fixing it. And we want to be mindful to not accommodate so much that it's hard to adjust back when the world returns to normal, or when we all start to figure out what the new normal looks like. And I think the point has been made in the Q&A, which I am seeing, that some young adults who were stressed or anxious with in-person classes or in-person social interactions may feel a little more comfortable right now with those things taken off the table, but they will come back. So we can't, ignore them and think that it's never going to happen again. So continuing to find creative ways to push ourselves and to push our young adult children to push themselves is going to be important. So we wanted to get back to some of the questions that you all asked of us. We'll kind of take turns managing your questions right now.
So one question that came in, and there were many questions like this, so we tried to pick kind of some hallmark questions, as well as questions that we've been kind of facing in some of our own work over the last month and a half. So question one, how do I reaffirm for youth that it's okay to go outside to get exercise? This is hard right now. I mean, we're getting a lot of messages from the media and from other sources about, what's okay and what's not okay. I would focus on following safety guidelines. And I think it's important for all of us to be following safety guidelines. But to also be mindful if our kids are going above and beyond in a way that's meant to reduce anxiety. So as much as we need to be mindful of where we are outside and potentially wearing masks and to, limit close contact to people, if our kids are refusing to leave the house, that may be more due to, anxiety reduction than really like the thing they have to do to keep themselves safe. Now, of course, this depends on where a kid lives. if you're in a less crowded setting and there aren't many people around, it may be easier to kind of get out and be outside the house. It may be a lot harder, for folks who may be in an apartment building or who live in the city. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But what I ask is like, am I acting in this way to stay safe, or am I acting in this way to reduce my anxiety? And it's a good question to be thinking about with our kids.
That's a great question to ask ourselves. So the second question that came up is, how do I foster independence when executive functioning skills don't match the individual's desired level of independence? So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, executive functions means the sorts of skills that we need to carry out a task. So planning, decision making, task initiation, task completion. How do we get things done and know how to do that effectively and appropriately? This is a really important task of emerging adulthood, right? Our brains are still developing well into our mid to late 20s. So a lot of those executive functions are still in development for our teens and young adults. But they learn these skills by practice and sometimes by messing up and learning what it means to get back on track. So some of the things that we've mentioned already, whether that's scaffolding a task, helping them make a mental map, providing opportunities for practice at home, or running through a task with them and then observing them while they do it on their own. There's different ways that we can help ourselves feel more comfortable letting go of the reins and letting our young adults do things on their own. But again, Dr. Poliafico mentioned mistakes happen and they're okay. And right now, that may be a good time for them to be trying some things on their own and seeing how it goes in the appropriate settings. Also helping them learn that they can ask for help, they can plan ahead, to think through what are maybe mistakes that they've made in the past and how do they avoid those in the future. So I often talk to young adults about their wish for independence also will match the sort of responsibility that they've been demonstrating. So trying to do a little bit of give and take. So you're giving a little and you're kind of helping them rise to the occasion.
Great. Our next question, how do I explain the importance of social distancing? So COVID-19 is so hard because it's an invisible enemy, right? We can't see it. And for our teens and young adults who often have an increased sense of invulnerability, it can be hard to kind of really take seriously this thing that we don't see and may not be affecting us personally. I think it could be helpful if your kid is not taking social distancing seriously, to tie this abstract idea of COVID-19 to something a lot more concrete and personal, to talk about why it's important to keep loved ones safe. If there's a grandparent or a relative who may be more vulnerable, the idea of social distancing is going to keep that person safe. And sometimes making it a lot more concrete and putting it in terms of like someone that our kids care about can make this whole idea kind of pop a little more and hold meaning for them.
What can our kids be doing to stay in touch with friends? And how do I encourage my child to stay connected instead of isolating? This is a big question and it's really important. I think there's a lot of different ways that we're learning to be in touch with each other right now. And kids are often the ones who know this more than any of us. So they're aware of apps and ways to use social media. Zoom is obviously a hugely important tool right now and a way to connect with multiple people at once, or FaceTime, or apps like House Party. Or there's ways like you can watch movies, together. Depending on where you are, there may be opportunities to take walks while keeping to the social distancing standards. I've seen kids in the neighborhood where I am in a parking lot, parking cars pretty, distanced away from each other and then sitting in the trunk and talking to each other that way. So I think there are creative ways that kids can get together and still be safe and be respectful of everybody's health and safety. And we understand there are kids who are avoiding this for any number of reasons, that they may be anxious about it, or feeling too down or bored to push themselves to go out. So, again, as a parent, I think we can try to scaffold, to help them think through opportunities. Sometimes in our own work, we set things up as sort of a social, an experiment, a mood experiment, right? That you may not feel like doing this, but when we don't feel great, we don't want to do much. And the opposite of that can be true. The more we do, sometimes the better. I don't know if this will be true, so let's just try it out. And then, we'll see. We'll take a rating before and after and see how you feel. Let's pick something small, whether it's a friend you feel comfortable, calling on the phone or on FaceTime before you jump into a Zoom party with 20 friends. That, can be kind of overwhelming, but helping them think through what feels like a good first step. And having them think about how they feel before and after. Maybe one way to sort of, again, just trying to get the ball rolling. And also, I think we have to bear in mind that sometimes we are all getting a little bit of Zoom fatigue. So if they've been on Zoom all day long in classes or at work or whatever the case may be, they may just not feel like getting back on a screen, and that that may be true. So maybe you pick a day where there's less screen time and you plan it for that day. So we want to just respect that there are aspects of this new type of socializing that may be harder for some people than others.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback on what Dr. Bennett is saying, thinking throughout this talk that, many of our kids may really struggle with some of meeting these milestones that we're talking about. Just as a point of information, pretty much all kind of mental health clinicians are kind of back in their virtual offices and providing support online. So don't hesitate to seek that help. And now may be a great time, even if a young adult hasn't been in therapy, maybe was and no longer is. It could be a helpful time to maybe even just have a booster session or to have a brief course of therapy to kind of help them adjust to what we're facing right now and to start, managing their anxiety and depression more effectively. To our next question, how do I encourage my child to be more outspoken in a virtual school setting? This, I think, relates to a lot of different anxiety-provoking situations or difficult, new, challenging situations that our kids may be facing right now. I would think first and foremost that it might take a little bit of time for our kids to get used to this new setting and to be patient as they adjust. They might not be participating as much as they were live. This is a new challenge. It's a new set of skills. I'd be thinking about what are the goals that we're setting for their participation. Are they realistic goals that we're setting? And if a kid really is struggling to participate in class or in other ways online, how can how can we all as parents set gradual steps to help them? Maybe they can start with some of those nods or emojis that Zoom and Google Meet has before they're saying something out loud in a class setting. Maybe we can, you can arrange, or you can arrange to speak one-on-one with a teacher or a professor online as just a first step, and then build up to small groups, smaller classes, and then larger classes. Or it may help to role play out with them prior to a class, what it would be like, to ask a question, or like I said, with a therapist. So finding ways to kind of build that skill gradually and to be patient with kids as they're learning these new skills.
Great. So the next question is, how can we help students manage their schedules and take responsibility for attending classes at the correct time? This is definitely a question I've heard before. And similar to the executive function question, there are ways that we can try to help our kids to manage these new schedules and take responsibility, helping them put the appropriate tools in place, setting the alarms that they need. You have more time potentially maybe to sit with them and help them use a planner if that's not a skill they've learned before, or if you don't have the time or they're just not going to listen to you, there are executive function coaches or organizational tutors that you may be able to access online, or other resources of that nature to help kids get the tools that they need to meet these goals. And sometimes it is an issue of motivation, and it may feel harder to get to school on time, and that just means going downstairs or going back upstairs, whatever the case may be. So we can use some of the strategies that we've already mentioned, whether that is scaffolding the task or setting rewards or incentives in place, a set of sort of a code of conduct for the home of what our expectations are to keep everybody on track.
Great. How do I help my child cope with a death in the family? This is really hard for all of us, because we don't have the same rituals and ways to memorialize, someone who's passed away that we're used to. I think it's important to find ways to memorialize a loved one who may have passed away. Whether that's, through conversation, whether it's attending online services or finding ways as a family or as a community, to honor and to grieve together. I think it's really important because we don't have those same outlets. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that all of us grieve and mourn in different ways. Kids are no different. Our young adults are no different. And so some may be overly emotional, some may not seem emotional at all. But I think it's important to kind of give our kids the space they need to process, give them opportunities to talk, but not to necessarily kind of over push them to talk, and to just help them know that you're available as needed to process. But there's no right way to do it because it's incredibly tricky. And I think as a society, we're figuring out how do we cope. So take comfort in the fact that, there's no right answer to this one, but some of these things can help.
And the last question, can I ever let my child get on the subway again? This is another really tough question, an important question. And if you don't have the subway where you live, you can insert some other activity that feels really far away and dangerous right now. I think we all have to continue to make choices for ourselves and for our families based on the information that we have from our city leadership, our state leadership, from sources that we trust and that we respect. Keeping in mind our child's age and ability to follow safety guidelines, to wear, whatever the appropriate protective gear will be for that particular situation at the time when you're ready to try it and when it opens up again. Every week things are a little bit different and we gain more information. So things that feel really far away right now will become reality again. So the time will come when we can, feel comfortable moving through our spaces, or we start to feel a little bit more comfortable moving through our spaces. And this is an opportunity for us to model for the kids in our lives, how do we be appropriately cautious while also not letting anxiety get in the way of meeting our goals and doing the things that are really important to us. So on that note, we have a lot more to come on a lot of the topics that we've talked about already today. For the young adults in your lives, we're doing our Tuesday webinars are specifically for teens and young adults to arm them with some of the skills that they need to cope with what's going on right now. And then we have a few more webinars upcoming for parents over the next few weeks on how parents can cope themselves, conflict management and communication skills, helping your young adult navigate so many of the abrupt transitions that they have had at this time. And then our last webinar is for young adults and parents together. We're going to have more time to talk about how do we accept reality as it is right now and actually try to make meaning of all the hard stuff that's going on during this time. So we do really hope that you will tune in again. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Be well and stay safe.
Thank you all. Have a good night.